what underlies the fact that we are having a conference on ecology where the major nation of the West, along with its allies in large part, are the people whose minds we cannot change. How is it that it is so impossible to make the United States, for instance, understand the crisis we're in and their relationship to the rest of it? I want to look then at Western ideas, religious ideas, and how those religious ideas are affecting both our economic principles and our scientific choices. Jonathan Edwards wrote once, "Saints do not see things others do not see. On the contrary, saints see just exactly what everyone else sees, but they see it differently." What does the West see? And how do they see it? That brings them into meetings like this and puts them in tension with what seems to be so commonly conscious to so much of the world. As Richard said, we know the situation. We know that we are in a period where what we see is a vast and complicated and crucial and obviously skewed world around us. We're losing, talk about asking animals and trees for forgiveness because we need to cut down a tree to build a house. We are destroying an average of 200 million animals a year for research on cosmetics. We're 2/3 of the hungry of this world, for whatever reasons, because the earth isn't producing or there are no trees there. 2/3 of the hungry of this world are women. 2/3 of the illiterate of this world are women. And 2/3 of the poor of the world are women. That can't be an accident. That has to be somebody's policy or philosophy of life. That this is a part of the world that you can feed last, house last, educate last, and free last. Where do we get ideas like that? How could we possibly live in this society and say there's something reasonable about that? We can rupture the placenta of the earth and sit back and not worry about it. We can watch the polar ice cap going and change the channel because it has nothing to do with us, and we can send our delegates to meetings like this, and we will go on choosing long-term profits over, or short-term profits over long-term treaties. We're using chemicals to activate the soil, and they're now depleting that land as well as poisoning the water that we need to grow those things. We talk about defending our security, and we're using and creating nuclear weaponry designed to destroy the greater part of the earth, and we have the effrontery, the arrogance to call that defense. How do you do that? And then trumpet treaties that have left the annihilation industry completely intact. What we have managed to eliminate is 1% of the nuclear arsenal of this world, and yet we don't see trouble. If those are the ideas that we are throwing into the universe, no wonder we have had 16 conferences on climate change. Not because we don't have the scientific data, but because the ideas that we are formed in the West have got to be changed. Now, I'm going to argue that these ideas are intellectual ideas. They are not simply spiritual ideas. They have spiritual impact, but they don't come out of our best spiritual understandings of the spiritual nature of the cosmos. And yet, we are in a world where, in my country, in a world filled with the obscenely poor, we are also filled with churchgoers. Now, there's got to be a disconnect between what we say is the spiritual life and what we assume is also the civic life into which or out of which we build our spiritual concepts. We haven't reached the point, clearly, of seeing differently. I'm not sure that we are really at the point, however many conferences we've had, as a people, of seeing at all. There was an essay written in 1960 by Lynn White Jr. The name of the essay is the Historical Roots of the Ecological Crisis. That essay was perceived as a kind of theological heresy. It is now taken, it's a classic in the development of theological thought. What did Lynn White say that shook the religious world? White wrote, "The major problem facing the modern world is that the Judeo-Christian ethic justifies domination." The major problem facing the modern world is that the Judeo-Christian ethic justifies domination. In other words, White was saying that what people do or fail to do about ecological issues depends on what they have been taught to think about creation, about themselves, and about their relationships to the things around them as a result of their thinking about the nature of God. So, for instance, if water has no meaning except for my comfort as a human being, then I can dam it up and drain it off. I can drown it in oil and waste and tin cans until it chokes the fish and poisons the children without even having so much as the grace to blush. And that is precisely what we do. We have not just separated ourselves from nature. That would be some sort of civic fault line. We have distinguished ourselves from nature, but more than that, we have made nature our product to manipulate. We have taken the ownership of nature. We don't see it. Now, the question is why, and I believe that the religious foundation for this problem in the Western world, as you move from one of these meetings to another, lies in the fact that the Western world, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, has chosen to choose one creation story over another. Like most religions, there's more than one creation story in Western theology. The one most of you would know, I bet, if you raised your hands, is the one you learned in Sunday school someplace about Adam and Eve. They're put in the garden, and the ancient tradition said, or translation says, to fill the earth and subdue it. Why are we here? What's our purpose? To fill the earth and subdue it, to take it and keep it, to keep it and steward it, to have it and use it. As a result, with that attitude that we are here to subdue the earth, we begin by losing our balance. We have forfeited our spiritual perspective. You can't sit around in a room and talk about spiritual perspective on the one hand when you are feeding it with some sort of theological barriers or obstacles to the spiritual life and the sustenance of the earth itself. We have put ourselves, in other words, this most religious people, in spiritual peril. When you realize that, you realize then that the Judeo-Christian ethic is, as a matter of fact, the most anthropocentric, the most human-centered of all religions. It begins by centering on the creation of humanity. They didn't talk about the flowers, the first day this, the second day that, the third day this, the fourth day that, and then you. Now we got to what counts. Now we got to what's going to do it right. Here sits the crown of creation. I am looking at it. Then it proceeds by glorifying it, and it ends with concern solely with the redemption of humanity. There is never any talk about what will happen to the earth, except that it will burn up, blow away, but you and I will stay. Those ideas are very clear. We teach that creation is a series of stages, and that each one is higher than the one before it. When you teach that, if you allow that idea to seep into its most logical viewpoint, you're saying then that humanity outranks the universe in splendor and achievement. Whatever you do is enough. This is God's answer. Secondly, we say, man, the male, is the crown of creation. We have built a pyramid, and up here sits the male. Now we know that's true because men have told us so. There isn't any doubt about how this system goes together. We've got somebody at the top of it whose rationality has brought us to this point. Whose rationality has brought us to this point. So if a woman weeps over it, if a woman cries about it, if a woman aches about it, we say women are like that, they're unreasonable. 3, we say God planned the world for human benefit. It's just this big cornucopia of Thanksgiving gifts, and you can have as many as you want. It's all there for us. Its purpose, the whole purpose of the planet itself, is to sustain our creature comforts, and it's eternal. It will always keep producing for us. That's what its purpose is. What are we worrying about? This is a blip. This is a blip on the cosmological screen. This is just a little temperature change. This is for us. Nothing bad is going to happen to it. Number 4, we teach we own nature. It belongs to us. And so finally, number 5, we say the function of this earth is to serve man's purpose, whatever that scope, whatever the end of it. That means then that we can now assume with confidence that humans are above nature. We're not nature. We're beyond nature. Despite the fact that as the top of the food chain, we'll be the first to go if pollution continues at the rate you can measure it tonight. Well, it's a neat picture. It's a tidy picture, but it's very partial in a world in which 30% of us consume 80% of the world's resources and somehow or other diminish the rest of the human race. That was the first creation story. There's a second one. Now, the interesting part of ecclesiastical gossip here is that the second one was really the first one. Somebody along the line put this second one first. I have a funny feeling it was for their economic advantage then, too. What's the second creation story? You remember this one, too. This is where Scripture says, the Judeo-Christian Scripture says, God brought the animals to Adam for naming. Remember that one at all? That was hardly touched. It's hardly ever preached from a pulpit in the West. It's almost never exegeted. But when they do exegete it, they say, now what this means is that by giving the human being the right to name the animals, that's the sign that the human being got power over the animals. I love asking a lay audience, how many in here have children? Anybody in here have children? Did you name any of them? Did you get any power? No, you bet you didn't. You get a little less power every single day. I don't care what you named them. The whole notion that it's a sound theological exegesis to say that this was simply another way of proving that the human being has power over every other living creature has got to be at least a certain degree of nonsense. So we have then a story in which the animals are brought to Adam, I would argue, to indicate the relationship between the human being and nature. The honest-to-God, caring, loving, responsible relationship. You don't name animals that you take into your family. The animal that you take into your family becomes part of your family. You take responsibility for that animal. You develop personal relationship. You would indeed say to that animal, if you had to kill it, thank you for what you've done. It breaks my heart to take this. but I know that this is the connection between us, and that you would give your life for me. You have two creation stories. The first is the story that explicates a theology of domination. It's all yours. Do anything you want to with it. Argue at every COP conference. Tell all of the smaller nations that this is your decision. You bought the mine. You own the diamonds. You get the oil. They're all yours. The second creation story gives you the theology of relationship, of responsibility, of ownership and care and love and sustenance and for an eternal understanding. It's beginning then to move your churches, to move your scriptures, to move your own minds, to teach your own children, to see that this theology of domination is what really is the spiritual demon in resistance in this conference. And until churches begin to emphasize not simply recycling, but God's purpose in putting us into relationship with nature, we're not going to change any minds. That legislation won't hold up. You'll be having COP conferences until your great-great-grandchildren are coming. COP 1762. And nothing has happened yet. Somehow or other, if we're going to be spiritual people, if we have any respect whatsoever for the way God works with humankind and the word that God has given all of us in our scriptures, then it's time to look up the second story. It's time to see what it says about eating organically, about what it says about not destroying the earth, about eating what you have in front of you. It is not a theology of domination. We have to choose between these two. And we have to know that the one is reckless and the second one is relational. Saints do not see what other people do not see. Saints see just what everybody else sees, but they see it differently. It's time for us to open up our scriptures, open up our churches, open up our spiritual counseling groups, and begin to see who we are a little different. Because if we don't get this story, we're going to be the first ones to go. That your presence here is a sign of grace. It's a sign of holiness. It's a sign of goodness breaking through. It's a sign of this call of God in the human heart. Find your second creation story and yourself in it, and the world will be saved. You're not going to do this with science. You're not going to do it with math. You're not going to do it with oil. You're not going to do it with money. You can only throw the thought out into the universe that we are to be in a love affair with the cosmos, and we have faith.